Now, in something we've seen in America, we are seeing also in India, and that is local farmers rising up to stop open-air trials of GMO farming. This report on Infowars.com, thousands of farmers in India rise up against Monsanto. Some have said that India's prime minister arrived at the nation's pro-GMO position with the help of generous campaign funding from a GMO lobby, but that hasn't stopped thousands of Indian farmers from demonstrating against Monsanto and their biotech cronies in a massive grassroots movement that shuns anti-farmer practices and GMO farming. Now, understand what they're fighting against is the same type of thing that we've seen in the most recent referendum in Hawaii. We've had several farming communities that have put in prohibitions against open-air farming. Now, here's the statement from a group that represents the farmers. They say the government is exhibiting its pro-industry stance by pushing for unneeded, unwanted, and unsafe GMOs in our farming. We want all open-air field trials of GM crops stopped immediately in the country, since such open-air trials pose not only a risk of contamination, but also the risk of trade rejection. In other words, they're not going to be able to sell this in other countries. He says, furthermore, any moves towards trade liberalization in agriculture, whether through the WTO route, the World Trade Organization route, or through free trade agreements, are unacceptable to us. Now, there's a lot in that statement, and we have seen the same sort of thing in America. Although we have seen little success in trying to get GMO labeling, the only exception being the state legislature in Vermont, all of the initiatives and referendums that have been brought up have been shut down by propaganda from Monsanto and others. We have seen in farming communities, they have done the same sort of thing because they understand that this is a dangerous practice. It contaminates their crops in these open-air trials. And the most recent example is in Hawaii. But what are they doing in Hawaii? Even though there was a referendum and they said we don't want these open-air trials because they are a trespass, they are now appealing it to the federal government. And we see that even in the GMO labeling. They are now appealing that to the federal government. But there's a higher authority that they're appealing to shut everything down. And of course, that is these free trade agreements, so-called free trade agreements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TTIP, the Transatlantic Partnership as well. That's what we really have to be concerned about. And now we see one after the other, senators and individuals on both the left and the right warning us about this path that we're going down. We had Elizabeth Warren stand up and say, if people knew what was in this secretive agreement, they would be appalled. And that's why the administration is not letting people know what's in it. She said, they say if the people knew, they would reject you. She said, well, then the problem is with the trade agreement. It's not with the people knowing what's in it. Now we see on the right, we see on Sunday night, Senator Jeff Sessions sent out a critical alert warning about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, what is he warning us about? He says the TPA, and of course that is the fast-track authorization that was just passed, eliminates Congress's ability to amend or to debate this trade legislation. He says not only will Congress have given up the 67-vote threshold for a treaty and the 60-vote threshold for important legislation, but will have given up even the opportunity for amendment. He said there is no real check either on the expiration of the fast-track authority. If Congress does not affirmatively refuse to reauthorize it at the end of the defined period 2018, the president can automatically renew it for another 3 years. And then this one last thing that he had to say, which is very important. The USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative, he says, outlined the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And when he put in to the key features summary, he said the TPP is a living agreement. Think about that. Just like the Constitution being some kind of a living document that they can just reinterpret as they wish, that's what they're going to do with this agreement that they're negotiating in secret. Not only is it going to be created in secret with just a straight up and down vote, no amendment, no debate, but they're also saying that it is a living agreement. This is what this means. He says this means the president could update the agreement as appropriate to address trade issues that emerge in the future, as well as new issues that arise with the expansion of the agreement to include new countries. The living agreement provision means that participating nations could both add countries to the TPP without Congress's approval, like China, and could also change any of the terms of the agreement, including controversial areas such as the entry of foreign workers and foreign employers. Again, these changes would not be subject to congressional approval. So just like we see Congress abdicating its authority to all these alphabet agencies, these bureaucracies, which then write all the laws without any of Congress's input, This trade authorization, which is really a massive surrender of sovereignty, and you can see it in what Senator Sessions just pointed out. We know that it's about sovereignty. We know that it's not about free trade. The trade areas that are in there are crony capitalism trade. This is no more free trade than we had free markets with the bank bailouts. But they're going to use this to do write their own laws in the future. And of course, corporations are giving themselves parallel status with nations. And this affects copyright, this affects free speech issues, this affects the freedom of the internet. And as we've talked about, it's pervasive. But now we're starting to see that it is also an immigration issue. See, not only are we going to be exporting jobs, we're also going to be importing workers without any control and possibly importing dependents who will be coming in on the entitlement state. And if you think that this is something that is xenophobic, that is targeted towards people from Mexico or South America, just understand this. When you've got completely open borders, people can come in from any country. The Wall Street Journal points out immigrants to U.S. from China top those from Mexico. It isn't about where they come from. It's about the number of people that come in and that we have no control over that or over the entitlement state. As I point out, China was a country of origin for 147,000 recent U.S. immigrants in 2013. India had 129,000 immigrants, which also was more than we saw from Mexico. Now, how do they define an immigrant? Because this is important from the statistics standpoint. They said that was any foreign-born person in the U.S. who said they had previously lived abroad, regardless of legal status. They say that it might still undercount some of the undocumented immigrants. Nevertheless, this isn't targeted towards any particular group. What we're saying is there has to be some control over our borders. There has to be some control over where we're going to send jobs, how many workers we're going to bring in. It's going to be massive unemployment. And if you want a good example of what this looks like, look at this report from John Bound about what happened at Disneyland.
I want to thank all my fellow leaders for their partnership and their commitment to making the TPP a reality.
If President Obama, the IMF, and legions of New World Order stalwarts have their way, your job, your children's future, and the future of the United States will be assimilated to the corporocratic Borg. Obama is diligently attempting to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership passed.
The single greatest challenge for the United States right now, and my highest priority as president, is creating jobs and putting Americans back to work. And one of the best ways to do that is to increase our trade and exports with other nations. 95% of the world's consumers are beyond our borders. I want them to be buying goods with 3 words stamped on them: Made in America.
Corporations are heavily lobbying for the deal as legislative sycophants, pawns of their corporate masters like John Boehner.
Making sure that these kids have a shot at the American dream, like I did. It's important.
Rally support for a trade agreement that will make NAFTA look like child's play.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to announce my introduction of and request co-sponsors for a privileged resolution to withdraw the United States from the World Trade Organization. By what authority does the World Trade Organization assume jurisdiction over the United States federal tax policy? That's the question. At last reading, the Constitution required that all appropriations bill originate in the House and specify that only Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes. Taxation without representation was a predominant reason for America's fight for independence during the American Revolution. Yet now we face an unconstitutional delegation of taxing authority to an unelected body of international bureaucrats. Let me assure you, Mr. Speaker, this nation does not need yet another bureaucratic hurdle to tax reduction.
It's very hard to make anything of the TPP because it's been kept very secret. Half secret, I should say. It's not secret from the hundreds of corporate lawyers and lobbyists who are writing the legislation. To them, it's perfectly public. They're, in fact, writing it. It's being kept secret from the population.
High-wage American workers and union members would face more direct competition from low-wage Malaysian, Vietnamese, and Mexican workers because the partnership would create a free trade zone with no tariffs or barriers. The treaty would give corporations a direct way to object to and even override individual countries' democratically passed laws. An international tribunal would have the power to overrule individual nations' legal standards and impose economic penalties. That power would be the cornerstone of an unelected corporocratic New World Order.
I wish people could remember what the border looked like between Texas and Mexico before NAFTA. I mean, it was poor, really poor, on both sides of the border. If you go down there today, there's prosperity on both sides of the border, and that's in our nation's interests.
We have the opportunity to remake the world. For this new era, our national security, we now know, will be determined as much by our ability to pull down foreign trade barriers as by our ability to breach distant ramparts.
The devastation the U.S. economy and the Mexican economy suffered under NAFTA is shocking. Another corporatocracy program chipping away at the U.S. jobs economy is the abuse of the H-1B visa work program. For example, at the end of October 2014, IT employees at Disney parks and resorts were replaced by imported cheap labor they had to train as they were laid off. Disney CEO Bob Iger is one of 8 co-chairs of the Partnership for a New American Economy, a leading group advocating for an increase in the H-1B visa cap. One of the briefing documents made this claim: H-1B workers complement instead of displace U.S. workers. It explains that as employers use foreign workers to fill more technical and low-level jobs, firms are able to expand and allow U.S. workers to assume managerial and leadership positions. But the workers interviewed said they knew of few co-workers who had landed one of the new jobs. Several of the workers in interviews said they didn't want to appear as xenophobic, but couldn't help but to observe, as one did, that there were times when I didn't hear English spoken in the hallways. As the layoff date neared, I really felt like a foreigner in that building, the worker said. John Bound, Infowars.com.
Well, that's it for tonight's news. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. Now, if you want to see it as the news happens each Monday through Friday at 7 Central and support our operation here, please become a paid subscriber at Prison Planet TV. That'll allow you to share it with up to 20 other people. All of you can have access to Alex Jones's documentaries. And again, you can watch it as it happens each Monday through Friday. Join us again tomorrow night at 7 Central.
A chemical spill contaminating the water supply in 9 West Virginia counties.
What are the health effects of having these drugs in our drinking water?
It's forced medical treatment without the consent of residents.
My friends, water filtration is one of the most basic actions you can take to protect you and your family from the harmful toxins and heavy metals in your tap water.
On average, the county says it sprays with the glyphosate at least once a week.
Few filters cut out the glyphosates that is found in water supplies worldwide. Remove pesticides, herbicides, chloramines, hydrofluorosilicic acid, sodium hexafluorosilicate.
Fluoride, it is in tea, it's in coffee, it's in water, it's in bread, it's in toothpaste.
It is our responsibility to protect our families. The establishment's not going to do it. It's time to take action. It's time to filter our water.
Go to InfoWarsStore.com today, and for a limited time, use the promo code WATER20 and get 20% off all Pro Pure products. Again, that's InfoWarsStore.com, or give our crew a call at 888-253-3139. You are watching the InfoWars Nightly News, which airs 7 p.m. Central at InfoWarsNews.com, and your support is helping us defend liberty worldwide.
Open-air trials of GMO farming. This report on Infowars.com. Thousands of farmers in India rise up against Monsanto. Some have said that India's prime minister arrived at the nation's pro-GMO position with the help of generous campaign funding from a GMO lobby, but that hasn't stopped this recent referendum in Hawaii. We've had several farming communities that have put in prohibitions against open-air farming. Now, here's a statement from a group that represents the farmers. They say the government is exhibiting its pro-industry stance by pushing for unneeded, unwanted, and unsafe GMO. Thousands of Indian farmers from demonstrating against Monsanto and their biotech cronies in a massive grassroots movement that shuns anti-farmer practices and GMO farming. Now, understand what they're fighting against is the same type of thing that we've seen in the most... Now, Oh, and something we've seen in America, we are seeing also in India, and that is local farmers rising up to stop those in our farming. We want all open-air field trials of GM crops stopped immediately in the country, since such open-air trials pose not only a risk of contamination, but also the risk of trade rejection. In other words, they're not going to be able to sell this in other countries.